Scarborough. I am Regional Resource Director for Care and Treatment Centers. And that title is just a long way of saying I am your resource girl. So I work in the community getting to know all the great resources we have available. So if I can ever help anyone find a therapist, a program, or any kind of mental health or substance abuse related resource, I am going to share my cell phone number and my email in the chat, and you guys are welcome to reach out at any point. Thanks so much to everyone for joining us for tonight's presentation, Not My Kid. As a reminder to you guys, we're going to conduct this session in webinar format, so everyone's microphones are muted and your participation will be confidential to all the attendees. And during the presentation, we would love for it to be interactive, so you're welcome to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you might have. If we can't get to your question, you're welcome to email me and we'll have someone from our team follow up with you directly. And also at the end of the presentation, we will start with the questions that were submitted through the registration process. So depending on the volume of questions, hopefully we can get to everybody. Tonight, I am very excited to introduce our presenters. We have Katie Myers and Bryan Stickney. Katie is a licensed clinical social worker. She's also our executive director at our outpatient program in Dunwoody called Care in Atlanta. And Bryan is a licensed master's level social worker. He's also a primary therapist at Care in Atlanta, and he runs our adolescent program there. I'm actually going to quickly turn it over to them because as soon as they start speaking, all of you will understand why both of them are so special and the perfect people to guide us through this tough conversation. So with that, I will give it over to Katie and Bryan.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight. We're obviously broaching a really tough topic and subject and situation, and so I know Martha mentioned that questions can be submitted. We're going to do our best to get to all of them because we know how intense this topic can be and how many questions come up because of just the nature of what we're doing tonight. So for those of you who are not familiar with the national coverage that's taking place around the accidental overdose of Dr. Berman, who is a TV doctor personality. Her 16-year-old son accidentally overdosed and died recently from taking a pill that he thought was Xanax. It was actually fentanyl. And we're here tonight. Our purpose tonight is to just have open dialogue and conversation and hopefully shine some light on some hard things, but also some tips and tricks that parents, families can do in general to do what they can do, because there's a lot that we're powerless over. So we're going to start before we do anything. We're going to start with that 5-minute clip that aired on the Today Show, just so that we're all starting from the same place.
Lethal combination, teens and 20-somethings stuck at home during the pandemic, and drug dealers using Snapchat to push a deadly product.
I didn't intend for us to be on the news. I just felt helpless. All I was thinking about is that this couldn't happen again. And I was so furious and helpless.
For years, Dr. Laura Berman has offered advice on matters of the heart. On Instagram Monday, it was her own heart breaking. My beautiful boy is gone, 16 years old, sheltering at home. A drug dealer connected with him on Snapchat and gave him fentanyl-laced Xanax, and he overdosed in his room.
He asked his dad for a cheeseburger, and an hour later, I went into his room because we'd been talking about an internship for the summer that he wanted to do, and he was on the floor and gone. I'm so sorry.
Sammy was a football player, a junior who was into business and just built a biosphere in his bedroom.
He was always doing little projects and full of intellectual curiosity and excitement for the future.
But Laura and her husband Sam also say Sammy was cooped up during the pandemic and bored. They say he wanted to experiment and found a menu of drugs for sale on Snapchat.
This big colorful menu came up with some man with a Twitter handle who was promising to bring it by your house. Each different drug had a different color, the way a kid would love to see it. And Snapchat is for the kids.
Do you think your son knew he was ordering fentanyl?
No way.
No.
That's 50 times more potent than heroin. I mean, the lethality of one pill is something that we haven't seen before and haven't really faced.
The DEA says people are ordering pills by common names like Xanax, but they're actually made of fentanyl, often manufactured in Mexico.
We've removed over 20,000 accounts from some social media sites as it relates to drug sales.
Ed Ternan and his wife Mary have been keeping a tally of the fentanyl deaths they hear about tied to Snapchat, 20, including their son, Charlie. He died 3 weeks before college graduation last May.
They just are greedy and they want to make a profit and they don't care that our kids are dying all the time.
I'm sorry.
And it's just, every day is so hard. I just miss them so much.
They founded the nonprofit Song for Charlie to warn others.
Snapchat's not the only platform where these kinds of pills and other drugs are sold, but it is certainly the most popular platform among retail drug dealers.
So you think they're targeting young people?
Absolutely.
I think that if social media wants to pretend to be responsible, this is a great place for them to change their behavior. The big tech is not taking responsibility for helping the police find the dealer.
Snapchat expressed its deepest sympathies and said in part, "We are committed to working together with law enforcement in all instances where Snapchat is used for illegal purposes. We are constantly improving our technological capabilities to detect drug-related activity."
But when they see our son and can relate to him and see what happened to him, maybe it will sink in. And if it helps one kid, it's worth it.
Laura and Sam say that is the only reason they agreed to speak with us at such a terrible time. Ed and Mary are actively involved with many families who've lost children, and they say they want to work with Snapchat. They think they could help Snapchat better understand what's happening out there and make changes to make it harder for illegal drugs to be advertised there. Guys.
Kid, it's just such a heartbreaking story on so many levels. Any tips for parents who are watching or listening? Any tips to look out for?
And it's hard as a parent of teenagers. I can tell you the biggest tip is to talk with your kids. I did it yesterday about the danger of fentanyl and how it's often packaged or sold as something else. Laura and Sam also wish that they had known more about what Sammy was doing on Snapchat. Like a lot of parents, they didn't even know the passcode for his phone. So they're now waiting for Apple to help unlock it. But they told me that can't even happen until there's a death certificate. It's just so heartbreaking on so many levels, guys.
Hopefully they can track down whoever dropped that off at the house. And we just want to say Dr. Laura Berman has been on our show many, many times. She's a friend to this show, and she shared her life with us, and our thoughts and prayers go out to her and her family today.
Well, I mean, what they're doing is not easy, but you can just see she's just hoping it stops it for somebody else. Somebody sees it.
That's a big help for parents watching, though. They'll make sure that they know their kids' passcodes. I play everything my kids are playing. I actually download it and play it. My wife thinks I'm crazy, whether it's Roblox or Among Us or all these popular games, TikTok, Snapchat. I want to see it as a parent with my own eyes, so I know what they're navigating through. That might help too.
Yeah.
Thanks for showing that, Kaylin. The intro for tonight, obviously difficult to watch that and to watch both sets of parents as they continue to grieve. And the reality that if you would have looked at either of those boys, Sammy or Charlie, most probably would never have guessed that they were experimenting, using. And so the topic for tonight, the Not My Kid, is in spirit with everything that was said towards the end, is that if this conversation can open the doors for one family to have a more honest conversation, a more candid way of just addressing something that's hard to address, then we'll have done something good in honor of Sammy and Charlie. So I'm going to do just real quick intro of myself. Karen, Atlanta, Executive Director, social worker, and lover of people who are in recovery and need recovery. And I got to this through different channels of working with adolescents and then adults, but all under the umbrella of substance use and mental health. And so this topic is near and dear. I've been to too many funerals of young people who have passed, and it's just time that we continue. Well, it's time for us to continue the conversation. And so Bryan Stickney is with me tonight. I'm excited about this because Bryan has such a way with both our adolescents, but also their parents. And so as we're talking with all of you, knowing that we're talking to parents, I hope that everyone really listens to what Bryan is sharing, because he does have some experience, strength, and hope, but an amazing skill set that he brings to help our teens who are in our program. And so, Bryan, I asked you last time we talked about this, if you could share with us a little bit about yourself, but also your secret sauce, because I think there's something very special about the way that you relate to teens and families.
I appreciate it, Katie, and I'm really happy to be on with this opportunity to talk about this because it's so important. So you mentioned me having a little bit of experience, strength, and hope. So I'll start it out by saying I actually struggled with addiction early on in my life, and the nature of this disease is it's progressive and it's chronic, and it's very treatable. And so I've seen both sides of the coin, and I know what the other side looks like, and I'm sure glad to be on the side that I am currently, but it takes work. The special sauce, Katie, I think comes down to rapport building and relationships, because that's what this population is looking for, is connection. And so I think that connection with not only the patients and the adolescents, but their family members, and involvement of all parties in the treatment process is instrumental. And so that's the way that we approach it at Caron, and I think what is considered best practice outside of Caron as well.
Yeah, I'll kind of expound just a little bit the rapport that you build and the safety that you create. And I always, for some reason, I do this like physical action of like safety, like, and hope in like this in my hands, right? Because I think that for a while, when patients are first coming in and when parents are first coming in and they're deer in the headlights, you hold on to that for them until they get a little bit further down the road and can hold on to it themselves. But that's also what gets the kids to start talking and sharing things that I know they share things with you that they never share with their parents, and lots of different reasons why. Like there's natural developmental reasons why that is, but I think your role in bridging some of that gap is so powerful. And so this kind of comes full circle back to what was said at the very end of that clip, which was having the conversations. And most of the questions that came in from those who registered for tonight's event was, how do you do that? Like, what does that look like? How early? What do you say? And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight because, one, I don't necessarily believe that in a true earnest effort to create healthy, open dialogue with your family, that even if you say I don't think there's a wrong thing to say when you come from your heart and just want to have a conversation. And so we're here not to give quick fixes or easy answers. I always tell families that whenever I'm working with them, there are no quick fixes or easy answers. I wanted to have a list of here are the things that you put on your kid's phone. Here are the things that you're going to be able to do and say. And these are all the things and list out that will help families avoid what the two families on the video shared and experienced. I don't have that. So if you came, and Bryan doesn't have that, if you came tonight hoping for quick fixes and easy answers, I'm so sorry. That is not what tonight's going to be about. But I will say that given, also what Bryan just shared as far as being on the other side, being on both sides, but today, happy to be on this side of it. There's a lot of hope in starting this process, even if you have to go through some really difficult times. And Bryan's going to share some of that as he shares in a little bit about his journey and really changing the family unit. And so I want to ask Bryan and kind of just get some insight into what are we seeing right now with teenagers? And granted, for those who are listening, like we're with teenagers who are using, they have some sort of substance use. They're entering into substance use diagnoses. They're here for treatment. So not what we just saw with Sammy and Charlie. But we can get a lot of information from these kids who are on that side of things. Will you share with some of that, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of what I'm seeing is particularly, so the assessment process is invaluable in all this, and an accurate assessment is so important. And that's where I've really noticed that these kids are coming in a lot of times with co-occurring diagnoses or traits of co-occurring diagnoses, whether that's anxiety, whether that's depression, in addition to some of the substance use. So I'm seeing, I would just to throw a number out there, I'd say probably 90% of the people I work with have some sort of underlying issue that drives them to want to cope. And so it's incredibly important to be able to work with them and treat some of the underlying issues that they're experiencing, the depression, the anxiety, in order to get them to a place where they're ready to set aside the substance piece of all this. And I'm seeing a lot of just a desire to escape. I think COVID has created an environment where, unfortunately, isolation is very prevalent, and that's very challenging. And I think there's plenty of things that we can still do, whether that's go for a walk outside, whether that's exercise, engage in meaningful conversation. I think that there's so many things that we can do to try to counteract the negative impacts of isolation. But yeah, a lot of co-occurring issues taking place. And I'm seeing some over-the-counter drugs being abused, whether that's a Benadryl, whether that's dextromethorphan, which is a common ingredient found in cough medication like Robitussin. So just off the bat, parents, be aware that these are drugs that are being abused by a lot of these teenagers, and it's scary.
Yeah, the access that kids have right now to, I mean, not even like talking about social media, but just like going to a grocery store or anywhere and having access to that, but also like not even going to a grocery store, going to the medicine cabinet down the hall, right? And so I love that you bring that up as far as like, because we're seeing an uptick in that trend here currently. And so parents, this is kind of call to action around, educate yourself around what are some common household things that kids can use, or anybody can use, frankly, to get high or to get impaired. And so the more that you know, the more that you're going to be able to address certain things that are going on in your home that you may not initially think is a thing. Prescription drugs are the other part that I want to bring up right now, because we are seeing, again, within our population, a vast majority of kids whose parents have prescriptions, and this could be prescriptions that are totally legit and totally necessary, or prescriptions that also shine a light on maybe another problem within the family system. Either way, the more they have access to, and kids are experimenters by nature. We want them to do that. We want them to like broaden their horizons. We can't always control whether they do that in a super healthy way or in a super damaging way, but educate yourselves, parents, about what's in your home, what's in your medicine cabinet. I'll even go as far to say, if you suspect that your kid is consuming alcohol and you have mouthwash with alcohol in it, I have known many a person who has desperate times call for desperate measures, and they will turn to anything. And so I guess the moral of this particular part is arm yourselves with information and educate yourselves. Anything else you want to add to that, Bryan?
Yeah, just I'd say be very cognizant of where some of your medication is in the home. If it's just in a bathroom closet, that's as easy as open up the door and pull it off the shelf. What is in our control would be to move that medication, keep it somewhere hidden so that access isn't as easy.
Yeah, and I think about the families too, where you're prescribed something and then you stop taking it because you don't need it any longer. But then there's this pill bottle that's hanging out, but you're not aware of what's going on with it because you don't need it. But Johnny down the hall may have become aware, right? So education goes a long, long way. What are you finding, Bryan, when the families are coming into our setting? Because we have a really unique opportunity to meet with families when they are in full-blown crisis, but also before. We have a program called Teen Intervene. I'm going to stop there and ask you just tell us what you're seeing with Teen Intervene, what it is, and what parents are experiencing and what the kids are experiencing at that stage.
Yeah, so Teen Intervene, I touched briefly on our assessment process. So if we go through the assessment process and determine that maybe this is just in its beginning stages, maybe it's not, progressed and gotten bad just yet, we do have a program called Teen Intervene. And what Teen Intervene is, it's an evidence-based approach that involves motivational interviewing. So what that means is essentially trying to get the young person to conceptualize what could my life look like if drugs were removed from the picture? What are some of the good things that might be taking place? Relationships improving, doing better in school, not having to lie. So some of those things we try to drive their motivation towards. But more specifically about the Teen Intervene program, it consists of 2 very structured individual sessions. So we will walk through worksheets and set goals. And so that's kind of what the first 2 sessions include. And we'll follow up on those goals, obviously, as we progress. And then the third and final session is the family. The entire family comes in, or parents and loved one, and if it's appropriate for siblings to be involved, they certainly can be. But that's where we sort of pull everything in and talk about sort of what has come out in the 2 individual sessions. And then we also try to instill some goals for the family moving forward, some productive ways to sit down and have conversations around the stuff that's really hard. And so we try to leave the families and the patient with more, obviously, than they came in with, armed with education, information, and practical tools that they can walk away with and implement in their lives.
Thank you. I know you've had some good success stories with some Teen Intervene kiddos recently, and I think a lot of parents, what we're also seeing is that, and this will kind of come back full circle to what you shared earlier, Bryan, about we're seeing the anxiety and the depression, and then on top of that, the self-medication, right? Like they're coping in this way. So bringing families into kind of just that honesty and that reality that there might be mental health stuff, right? And there might be some patterns or behaviors happening within the home that need to be addressed. And that is, from my experience, and happy for you to share yours, but my experience is that a lot of families don't want to look at what's going on within the family. It is very much, here's our child who's, and in therapy we call them the identified patient. But here's the person that we're like all eyes are on. And we just want you to fix them, right? Like if you could just fix them, everything would be great at home. But the reality is that home is this intricate web, right? And the family has to look at a lot of stuff too. And a lot of families don't want to. There's a lot of resistance, a lot of defensiveness, a lot of protection against like, hey, I'm not the one who has a problem. And I think for those who are with us on this call, I just want to encourage you to take a deep breath. When you think of the family unit and what's going on in your home and what is going on with your kids. Getting to a point where we can address all the different things is a place of freedom and a place of hope and healing. And so the more that you can come to the table with willingness and vulnerability to kind of look at stuff that you're dealing with too, I think that is huge, pivotal in what you end up teaching others in your family, modeling that behavior. And so, Bryan, I'd love to hear, I know I just hit on several points, but like the family disease of addiction is a family disease. That's what we call it because that's what it is. Families pivoting and making changes, but vulnerability and being willing to just get help.
Yeah, Katie, I think what I love is we don't just treat the patient. We treat the entire family, and I'm not going to say that we'd be doing a disservice, but we certainly wouldn't be addressing everything that needs to be addressed for effective, lasting, meaningful recovery to take place if we don't work with the entire family. A lot of times I'm hearing from these adolescents, mom's doing this, dad's doing this, and maybe unknown to the parents, they are in some way, somehow contributing to the patient's desire to want to go out there and act out. And so that's why we bring everybody in and bring that up, pull it into the room. Let's get honest. And a few things I wanted to touch on, Katie, that I think are really valuable for some families to hear is I love when families set up a time throughout the week, maybe 5 o'clock on a Sunday evening, everybody comes to the table, sits down with each other, and knows that this is a time where I'm going to talk about what's going on with me, how I'm feeling, how the week is coming up, what it looks like. And that's where some of the vulnerability that you touched on, Katie, can be really powerful. Deep, meaningful conversations a lot of the times are driven out of vulnerability. So maybe your child comes and sits down and is like, I'm not trying to talk about anything. But then they might hear something that you say, getting very personal and intimate, and sharing that with your son or daughter, that might drive them to want to talk about what's going on with them. And so that's a really powerful process, and that open and transparent communication that's so instrumental in this, that's where that can start to take place.
It takes rarely do intimate and meaningful conversations happen because the kids initiate it. It's usually because the parent does. And I see Martha. Do we have a question that's like super timely?
Yeah, we have a great question. How do we help parents understand that the importance of their involvement is not a blame game? So not blaming the parents.
Yeah, that's that's a great question and hard to answer in a soundbite. I think for those of you who may not be familiar with Al-Anon was where we ask people who love an addict or alcoholic to go to that group, to be amongst others, to share, and that's where a lot of healing happens. In Al-Anon, there are 3 C's. You didn't cause it, there's no cure for it, and you can't control it. So that's not a lot of, that's very hope-filled in some ways, because you just get to work on you because you didn't cause this. So the blame game around what's going on in the home, even though those questions are being asked, it's not in the spirit of pointing the finger. I know I could give you a list right now of 100 families, and 90 of them were raised in the most picturesque, perfect family, a 2-parent household, educated, access to resources, and the kid still goes out and uses and gets addicted. And another 100 families these are families that actually started smoking pot with their kids at a young age. These are parents who didn't have the skills or access to resources. And those kids did not continue on to be active drug users or struggle with addiction or alcoholism. And so I share that to say there's not this one-to-one correlation. But I love that Bryan mentioned earlier that the contribution. So there's these 3 C's. You didn't cause it, can't control it, and there's no cure for it. But there's this other C on the other side that is contribution. And when we understand and realize that as a family, we all impact one another. I can give a whole nother 3-hour talk on family systems theory around, one action or inaction from one family member creates an opposite or equal. And it's not that cut and dry, but it's that the theory is there. And so it's not blame. It's more of, do I want to be a part of the problem or do I want to be a part of the solution? And so at that point, it kind of doesn't matter where you were before. Today, moving forward, even though I might feel like there's blame or the fingers being pointed at me or why didn't I do certain things, but I can make a decision today as a parent. Do I want to be part of the problem or do I want to be part of the solution? And then from there, you get to choose, right? Bryan, I'd love to hear your response to that.
You touched on in the very end of what you were saying exactly what I was thinking about, and that being, we're not looking to say, this is your fault, bad you, this is a situation where, like, this is where we are today. How can we progress from this in a positive manner? These are some behaviors that you can engage in that might have the potential to impact your loved one this way. And these are the things we think might be productive moving forward for you to do. These are the things that we think might be productive moving forward for you to do. And same thing with the patient. This is where we are. The past is what it is. We cannot control or change that. What we can control and change is our actions and how we move forward into the future. And if we make some changes, that can go a long way. And what we know is the best chance at this is if each person in the family is doing their part and playing their role. And what that oftentimes facilitates is a higher likelihood of success for the identified patient, as we've touched on.
Yeah. I've used the example before of when, and this speaks to parents or caregivers or just people in a loved one's life who feel that there's a finger being pointed or that there's some blame. The reality is that the quicker that you get on board, the quicker that you can work through. And my recommendation for those who might be feeling that or know somebody who's experiencing that or whoever asked that question is, are you going to a therapist right now? Are you engaged in your own self-care and your own mental health? Because again, as parents, we model for our kids. They see what we do, and up until a certain age, they think everything that we do is right? And so we have the power to do those things for ourselves. So if you're feeling that, my first recommendation is get with Martha, who mentioned earlier that she's our resource director, and she has access to, I literally think she knows everybody. Get you connected with somebody who you can sit down with and start to work through that, because the quicker you get involved in the healing and the recovery process, I liken it to walking versus flying. A patient who comes in who's dealing with whatever substance use, they can get better by them, like they can get better. And they would be walking down the path. When their families join in their own recovery, their own healing, their own self-care, their own therapy, their own stuff, it takes that patient's recovery from walking along that path to flying. And that might be an extreme, but I don't know that it is, because I've worked with some families that I can tell minute one who's going and doing their own work and who's not. And usually the people who are not doing their own work are the ones who are defensive and angry and frustrated and don't talk about me. This isn't about me. This is about my kid. And I promise you, your kid sees that. And that is the way that they will also respond. I'm not talking about me. I'm going to point the finger somewhere else. And so it's just not productive. Bryan, you've had some pretty amazing experiences, both with kids in our program and just like the turnaround with families, but also personally. What can you add to that to give parents some hope?
Yeah, I mean, so my addiction, was started off just some experimentation, progressed as I went off to college. And then my family intervened at first when I was like 21. I was not ready at that point, and I went through treatment and complied and did all the things I needed to do to get out of there. But I knew deep down I was not ready to stop. But what was so incredibly valuable about that first experience in treatment for me was that my family got the opportunity to get educated around all this. And so slowly but surely, I started recognizing the changes that they made. What that instilled in me was they're trying to do this. I love them. They're concerned about me. Yes, addiction is a disease of selfishness, but when you start to recognize, like, here are two people that I love more than anything, maybe one person that I love more than anything, and they're trying their darndest to address this, that does something. And that impacted me when I saw my parents doing their own work. And so, you know, as my disease progressed and, you know, ultimately I went back to treatment. My parents were ready to rock and roll, and our family has experienced a better relationship than I would say we ever got the chance to experience even before I started using drugs. We're in a place now where our communication is open, honest. We enjoy quality time together. It's a blessing. I feel grateful that I got to go through the things that I got to go through. Yes, my story, you know, took a while to develop. I've also worked with families that I've noticed drastic changes within weeks of them making some subtle adjustments in the things that they're doing at home. And so I think it's really powerful. This doesn't have to be a prolonged, you know, 5-10 year deal. The changes can help now.
Thank you for sharing that, especially just your own personal journey. We've talked about this before, just in our work together, and it came up again tonight with the gratefulness, right? Like the gratitude around what this journey has been for you and your family. And most people can't see it in the very beginning, right? We would much rather just avoid it, like head in the sand, like this isn't happening, like we'll just pretend everything's okay, we'll just keep going.
It's easier that way.
Initially it is, absolutely is easier. And then there's this trauma, right, that happens. And if it weren't for that trauma, if it weren't for like your family addressing some of those things, and this is where I want to pull it into the pre-addiction. If your kid is experimenting, or if you're thinking to yourself, like, I want to believe that it's not my kid, but could it be my kid? That the changes that can be made, and the gratitude that you could find, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hard sometimes. You're going to get pushback. You're going to feel stupid. You're going to say one thing, but really meant to say the other thing. And what I tell families all the time, and what Bryan, you just described, was like, we get to choose our discomfort. And especially as parents, because there's so much discomfort being a parent. But the discomfort of, okay, Sunday night at 5 o'clock, let's sit down and really, I'm going to talk about like things I'm going through. I'm going to get vulnerable, and everyone might just stare at me. And that's hard and awkward. And anytime you do something new, it's going to be a little challenging. The flip side to that is that when we don't start the conversations early and have them frequent, is that we have the other discomfort, that is all of the fallout and all of the trajectory that we tried to just kind of hide from, or we weren't ready to address ourselves for whatever reason. And so my call to action, I guess, right now in this moment is to really like breathe in this reality of, okay, I can choose my discomfort. I can choose to address it now, and maybe it's silly and we'll laugh about it later, or it could really open up some amazing doors, or I'm gonna do something really uncomfortable later when, God forbid, another kid orders something off of Snapchat and dies, because that discomfort is not something that you get to come back from. And so my encouragement for parents who are listening right now, you have an opportunity to do something different, and model for your kid. And like Bryan's parents, they got education and started getting better. It sounded like before Bryan was ready to like take hold, right? And so because they had done that work, I think you said they were ready to roll. So that when Bryan was ready to enter into that, they were in step with him. And how much work would they have had to have done had they not continued that work to get healthy and to be healthy? And so, yeah, I just think it's a powerful opportunity and scary. So I'll also say right now that when we engage in the things that are scary, because I'm a therapist, I say this a lot, sharing your feelings and working on your stuff, I promise that you will not die or catch fire. I promise. And so with that promise, those are like worst case scenarios. You can begin your process. And I think like that's the biggest takeaway from this is, as families, as parents, you are going to be powerless over so much. I don't have an answer for Snapchat. Take your kid's phone away is my answer for Snapchat. That's not a good answer, right? I don't have an answer for the normal experimentation that happens and the curiosity from like really good kids, really smart kids, who enter into the experimentation, and sometimes they get hooked and sometimes they don't. I don't have an answer for that. There's no quick fix for all the craziness. I think somebody, Trudy, put in the comments something about buying drugs off of the dark web unknown to parents. You will not be able to control that. You will not have power over that. What you do have control over, and what you do have power over today, is if there's something that's unhealthy, even if you're thinking, man, we're doing great, we're fine. I would guess the Berman family thought they were just tracking along, right? It never hurts to start these conversations. There was another question that came through as like, when do you start talking to your kids? We treat adolescents age 14 and older, and so we don't get the opportunity in a treatment setting to really address kiddos. And the averages, and you can look up statistics that they're all over the web. Some range from kids are starting to use alcohol as young as 10. Average age from one website was 13, and kids are starting to use marijuana as early as 11, with more regular use starting to show up again around 13. And so 50% of seniors, high school seniors, have used an illicit substance. That's not marijuana and that's not alcohol. These are the scary drugs, right? Like an illicit substance that when you look at your kid and you're like, no way, not my kid. It doesn't hurt right now to insert just a pause and say it could be my kid, and let's have a heart-to-heart. I think I would watch that Today Show clip with a kid as young as, 11 or 12 maybe. There are maturity levels within kiddos that really make ages, the range varies drastically. But I have candid conversations, age appropriate conversations with my 7-year-old. So my belief is that you can't start too early, and you can't have the conversation too frequently. Bryan, what would you say if we're talking about families' reactions, and like, what if their kid does get honest? What then? Like, what? Okay, I asked for this information and I got it. What now? What happens?
I think the easiest answer to that would be call a professional, because they are the ones that are equipped. We are the ones that are equipped to handle that appropriately. One thing that I would encourage families, and this is incredibly difficult, but if somebody does get honest, if the response, it's so individualized, but I'll say if somebody does get honest, try to maintain an equilibrium. Don't become hyper reactive and pounce. And while that is so incredibly difficult, if the child recognizes that that's the response that I'm going to receive when I share vulnerable information, oh, okay, I'm never going to share anything again. And so be cognizant and be mindful of the way you respond to that information, and try to stay as calm as possible. I know that that's really hard, obviously. And then say, okay, this is where we are. I really appreciate you sharing this with me, and let's see about, see what we can do about this. You shared this with me for a reason, and so let's see what we can do. One thing I also wanted to circle back on, Katie, was when you were talking about the dark web question. A lot of times, a family's initial response is to, okay, give me your computer, give me your phone. You're sitting in your room, you're not going anywhere, door's locked. So a lot of times that over control that sometimes families will try to implement, it's you can't do anything, you're going to be in your room. That can exacerbate a lot of the stuff. That can make a person frustrated, resentful. And so that is not the types of emotions that we're trying to facilitate. So be cognizant of finding that appropriate level of control, because at the end of the day, you can't really control everything. It's just not possible.
Yeah, I like the example that you had used recently with me of, to try to and this is where seeking professional help is really important, because if the reactions, if your kid says, I'm experimenting with marijuana, or my friends are doing this thing, and I don't really know what it is, but this is what they're doing, or that's one thing, right? If your kid responds with, I'm shooting up heroin, that requires a much different action along with the response. And so I find that the families that are able to have kind of that warmth and that gratitude to hear the information, even though it scares parents so much to know these things, that response, even with something as dangerous and as hurtful or harmful as heroin, we still want to be able to say, like, oh my gosh, like you shared that with me, and thank you. And then action, right? When you're dealing with stuff that's more of the illicit type. And I don't mean to minimize marijuana or alcohol, but I do want to kind of just normalize to some degree experimentation, but also, again, the dialogue that you can have with your kids so that they understand how risky some experimentation is. We are 9 minutes until the end of the hour, and I know we're going to answer a bunch of questions. Bryan, as we're kind of wrapping up our portion, when we talk about family dynamics and coming to a place of just openness and honesty, where would you suggest parents start with their own self-care? Like, where do parents need to, because I'm going to want to run to TikTok and take it off my kid's phone, right? But maybe the more like beneficial thing to do, although I totally think all kids should not have cell phones. My world as Katie sees it. Nobody has a cell phone. But Bryan, what can you share with families and parents as far as what can they do like right now to their journey? How can they begin their journey right now?
I say initially, like have a recognition and some self-awareness, see where you are. If you're super anxious all the time and stressed out, and cortisol is running all over your body, be aware of that, and from there, I would say try to find things just behaviorally, take different courses of action, finding things that you enjoy doing, and trying to do more of those. Whatever that is for you, trying to implement intentionally doing things that you enjoy, do more of that. I would say if it feels to a level where you feel like it's just beyond that, like I'm doing some stuff that I enjoy, reaching out to a professional, see about getting a therapist and engaging in treatment, maybe it could be beneficial. Just a couple of things.
I love that. I'm not sure. The sound on my end was a little garbled for a little bit. I don't know, Martha, can you was it garbled for you as well?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Bryan, maybe you can log out and log back in. Would that be okay, guys?
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to recap because I caught everything because we've had these conversations before. Bryan, do you mind logging out, logging back in? Because there was some background and some garbly, but I'm going to recap what you just said because it's so important for our own self-care, right? And it's right now, especially with COVID and just the stress of, oh my gosh, everything feels harder today, everything. But we're either going to spend time and resources on our health, or we're going to spend time and resources on our disease, our sickness. And I just, to piggyback, Bryan was saying, find the things you enjoy and do more of them. The healthier that you are as a parent and a head of a family, the more that the family sees that and then falls kind of in line, like you give them permission to take care of themselves as well. And so I love that idea, and it's counterculture in a lot of ways. Some of us really wear our busyness and our overextendedness as a badge of honor, and you will spend time and resources on wellness or your sickness. Do something about your wellness and your family's wellness tonight. Brian's back. What else did you want to share as far as this part? We've been all over the place, but anything else you want to share?
I think just to reiterate the importance of facilitating open dialogue in the family home, and starting that as early as possible. The sooner that you can begin having these conversations, these meaningful conversations with your children, the better. I would say fostering resilience is really important. And so rather than, and this also starts at a very early age, so rather than swooping in, catching them when they fall, not letting them figure things out on their own, that can be detrimental in the development and the way that somebody develops a schema or the way that they view the world. And so allowing, an appropriate degree of failure and letting them find their way through that can really be powerful for the individual. And so those meaningful conversations early, not swooping in, allowing some natural consequences to take place. That's a big part of this. Not easy. I certainly recognize that. And it's very valuable. Just a couple things.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that in. It also made me think of, I'm gonna lose it, the kind of letting kids experience and starting at a young age, and knowing that parents, you're not going to navigate this perfectly, no chance. But it's easier, I think, to navigate it with a sincere heart and a willingness to do some of the hard things earlier, because the hard things they're harder when we wait and we have to do them later. We're gonna pause now. I had some additional statistics. I think people can look up a lot of statistics on their own. The web is helpful in some ways and not in others. And let's shift over to some of the questions that either they came in before with registration, or questions that have come in through the chat during presentation. Martha?
Sure. Let's start out with some of the questions that we received during registration. How can I initiate an honest conversation about drug and alcohol use or abuse with my young adult who lives at home.
Bryan, you want to take that one, Bryan?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I don't know that we really touched on was if you're noticing some behavioral changes, maybe a new friend group, maybe a lack of motivation, maybe not doing things that they enjoyed or used to enjoy. I think maybe confronting is too harsh of a word, but having a conversation like, hey, Johnny, I noticed that these are some things that we've seen. And name the behavior. Like we've noticed your grades slipping. We've noticed that you're not trying out for the football team or whatever. And see what that's about. That might, have an honest conversation about that. But I think it's important to confront the behaviors that you're noticing, and it's not a bad thing to bring a drug into the conversation if that's something that's going on. Like, don't be afraid to bring into the conversation, hey, like, I know that this is maybe not what you want to hear right now, but like, is there some stuff going on that maybe you'd like to have a conversation with us about?
Yeah, I like the openness and the candor around that. I think the more that we tiptoe or walk on eggshells around the concerns that we have for our loved ones, the harder it is, and it goes back to some of that enabling behavior. And I'm grateful that you brought up some of like the signs, the warning signs, because right now with COVID, it feels like so everyone's isolating. Kids are on a virtual platform for parts of their school, or some kids are on 100% virtual. And so grades might be dipping or doing something weird because of that. But that's okay. If there are other answers, engaging in the dialogue is what matters. So we could probably give a little bit more specific of an answer if we had a little more context around this family situation. But I would say do some self-care yourself so that you are prepared to go in and be vulnerable, and exactly what Bryan described. I'm worried about you. I'm noticing something. Will you please talk to me? And then remain open.
Thanks, guys. Did you have something else, Katie? Okay. How can we best help a teen who doesn't see their cannabis use disorder as a problem?
I'm gonna kick that over to Bryan too.
So this is really coming up a lot lately. Just whether it be the decriminalization in some states and the stigma of maybe some of the medical benefits of cannabis coming out, that doesn't change the science that, particularly in an adolescent brain that's not fully developed until the age of 25, the impacts that cannabis has on the neurons in the brain. It can slow down development. It does decrease motivation, and it can lead to depression. It can cause anxiety, paranoia. There's a lot of detriments around, THC use. This is not to say if your child smokes weed, once or twice a week that they're, they're addicted and they can't come out of this. But this is a battle. This is a challenge that's coming about. So I think education is a very important piece to this. And maybe a program like a Teen Intervene to start out and just provide some education to that individual could be a good place to start. Bless you, Katie.
So thank you. That's why I was gonna emphasize too your last bit there, that if you're bumping up against a wall, ask for some help, some outside help. There might be, and likely is, an underlying depression or anxiety presentation that's being dealt with or handled by the marijuana. But when you find yourself bumping up against a wall, reach out. And there's lots of resources, not just at Karen, but all over all over. And Martha knows everyone and can connect you.
I don't know about everyone, but
close.
Thanks, guys. How can we start a conversation about whether our child uses drugs or not? How can we help them disclose what drugs they are using?
I'm not sure that it matters how old this question, parents coming from this family situation. Watch the video, the clip of the Today Show with your kid. Watch that with them and allow yourself to have raw emotion around the fear, the real fear. Dr. Berman didn't see this coming. Charlie's parents, he was 3 weeks from graduating college. They didn't see it coming. And there's no crystal ball or way to say if they had done something different, and that's not helpful either. The woulda, coulda, shoulda game is not helpful. But watch that 5-minute clip with your loved one, and when it's over, say, I would love to know if there's anything that you're struggling with, engaging in, and know that, I don't have control over what you do when you're not in my presence, right? And I love you, and I want you to know that you can come to me and talk to me if there are things going on. And you might get, again, the look of like you've got two heads and nothing comes of it, but you've planted a seed, a very important seed, to where your kid now has seen a different side, most likely, than before. So that would be if I had a silver bullet today for that particular question, it would be cue up the Today Show. Watch it in its entirety.
Thanks, Katie.
I like that too. Martha, if you don't mind, I'll add on to that a little bit. So I love the title of this, Not My Kids. So knowing the things that I know, your kids probably think, not, this isn't just parents, this is about the patient or the adolescent or the child too. And they are probably thinking, this kind of stuff would never happen to me. So I love the idea of showing the Today Show clip, so the reality of what's going on in the world can, I don't want to use the term scare tactic, but like sometimes things like that are effective. Like this person might watch the video and be like, gee, like I had no idea that this stuff was even going on. Because prior to watching that, maybe, that no one dies from doing this, or this. Oh, maybe they do. And that might open the eyes.
Thanks, guys. If teens are experimenting and reaching out to potential avenues such as Snapchat, how do we monitor since Snapchat disappears?
I mentioned this earlier. You can't. I wish that wasn't the answer. This is one of those points where it's we are powerless over a lot. I'm powerless over the dark web. I'm powerless over Snapchat. I'm powerless over just a lot. And so I guess I want to validate and normalize this, whatever that feeling is of powerlessness, that short of taking your loved one's phone away and just eliminating any of that contact in its entirety. But I'll tell you, even when you do that, guess what? Kids were using drugs before cell phones and Snapchat. Kids were finding dealers and getting access to things. And so I think I would focus my energy less on how can I monitor Snapchat and more on how can I create a healthy space so that if something does come up or my loved one does want to talk to me about something, they know I'm a safe person. And that's tough because you're not going to have control over more than what you do have control over. Yeah, wish I had another answer.
Yeah, it's tough. Because it's what I hope all this brings about is some policy changes and advocacy towards addressing some of the problems and concerns with social media use and it being used, to get drugs. It's obviously not its intended purpose, and so I'm hopeful that they can make some changes around the way that they operate. And Katie, I think you touch on it. Like the problem is, yes, Snapchat might help facilitate access to drugs, but it's the person on Snapchat that's trying to find the drugs, and they can go on the avenue however they want to find it. And so rather than monitoring the Snapchat, I love what you said, Katie, like let's have the conversations and let's try to help you and get at the desire to use the drugs and not the Snapchat.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any thoughts around how to help young people engage with each other to avoid drug use?
So I was thinking, Bryan, if you have an answer ready, feel free. I think this is also like a really tough angle because kids are going through a lot of this experimentation together, right? Like they're naturally inclined to do these things. And I would say that if you notice your kid hanging out with a different friend group, to have conversations around kind of what that is. Again, open dialogue, but I always think contact with parents. There's so many times that if just parents of friends communicated or had a little bit, just better communication, tighter communication, some things wouldn't slip through the cracks. But again, you're looking at something that you have very little control over. But yeah, keeping in contact with the parents. I don't have a great answer for that one because I feel like they're all dealing with various stages of it. And sports don't cure it. Kids who are in sports aren't the ones who are safe. Kids who are doing well in academics aren't safe. Kids who, are super extroverts and super active aren't safe. And the kids who are introverts and who are kicking it at home aren't like, and I hate to say that, like that no one's safe, but it starts with the family.
Yeah, this disease does not discriminate. And I think you highlighted that very well there, Katie. To the degree that you can, try to instill motivation to engage in healthy activities. You out there, play sports, get active. But the reality is, like, if there's kids on the sports team that are going to be using and the kid wants to use, they're going to do it. And so being ready for that is going to be really important. And one thing that I haven't touched on yet that I think is so important, and I keep using that word, but boundaries, consequences, and an understanding on all parties of what the rules are. So, hey, Johnny, if you show up late for curfew, your consequence is going to be no Xbox for a week, no car for a week, whatever. And it's really hard sometimes for parents, and I see this all the time, is families not following through on the boundaries that they establish. That's a really important piece because a lot of these young people are so incentivized to play video games or to have access to their vehicle that we can use that leverage. Parents can use that leverage. And a lot of times that's effective for a long enough period of time to get through that really difficult period. So, hey, if you come home late or you fail a drug screen or we catch you using, you're not going to have your car or you're not going to be able to play Xbox for X amount of time. And that's going to instill a little incentive to not use on the adolescent's behalf.
Yeah, and I'll say, especially if it's experimentation, and when we cross the threshold of experimentation into full-blown addiction, sometimes some of those efforts don't land, or as they're not as effective. They can be, but I love the part of like the follow through with what you say. And I have said to many families, it's better that you not have any boundaries, like just don't set any boundaries, no rules. It's better to do that than to set rules that you're not going to follow through on, because of what, again, that teaches within the relationship is that, oh, well, they say I'm going to get trouble if I do that, but I'm really not. And so the disease of addiction and just the teenage brain is figuring out how to do and get away with. And that's very natural and normal developmentally. And we can contribute to that by setting a bunch of boundaries and then waffling on them, or just not being able to back them up with the integrity that is required when you're saying you're going to do something and then you do it. And then I'll piggyback on that and say, seek out some professional help around that, because I see that characteristic probably more common. It's a more common thread through the families that we interact with than maybe any other trait. So get some help with that if that's something that you struggle with.
Thanks, guys. Our next question is, can you discuss current drug trends in drug use in teens? And we actually had a participant give us some great feedback, so I'll read that to everyone. I've seen an increase of duster use, lean, and all sorts of cough syrup. Also, the increase of children, adults buying drugs off the dark web that's unknown to parents.
Yeah, I'll let you start with this one, Bryan, because you see more of it.
Yeah, I see exactly the things that Martha just described. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but the cough syrup, yes, that could be some of the lean and the codeine, the prescription opioid that's a lot of times given for coughs, but also the cough syrup like Robitussin, that has the dextromethorphan in it. Kids are abusing that because it produces a little bit of a dissociative effect, and it's something to alter their mood that's easily accessible. And so I'm seeing a ton of that. I'm seeing a lot of hallucinogens, LSD, mushrooms. I'm seeing a lot of folks, even from, when I was 18, not all that long ago, it was not where it is today. And so that's concerning, during school, after school, a lot of hallucinogens. And then, you'll see the Xanax, you'll see the opiates, you'll see the marijuana. But those are some trends I've noticed.
And as I'll just piggyback a little bit briefly, that those are also substances that are often incredibly difficult to drug screen for. So a lot of quick test cups that parents can get from the drugstore, they're limited in what they will show up within those screens. So if your kid's huffing, that's not going to show up on any screen ever. And if there's a use of Robitussin and there's other over-the-counter things, it might show up on a screen and it might not, because of the chemical makeup of it. And so it's just so much harder to regulate and to really know, which is why having open dialogue with your kids is the better route.
Thanks, guys. I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important to ask again, what information needs to be said at younger ages regarding drug use?
Well, we know that Just Say No campaign didn't work. What can be said to younger kids? Depends on the kid. It depends on, I'll give some examples of my own personal experience with some of this. Using age-appropriate language, my 7-year-old. I will draw connections and parallels, and God help him that his mother is a therapist, but I'll draw comparisons and connections to different things that help him connect with when he's like zoning into something like screen time, or like completely zoning out to me. And what's happening, and I don't say this to him, but what's happening is that he's getting a tap on the reward system in his brain watching TV. And this is the equivalent of a 7-year-old, like his addictive behavior is screen time. So his reward system is just getting pinged while he's watching TV. We take that away, and there's grumpiness, and there's, you know, agitation, and I'll talk to him about that, and I'll say, I've noticed that you're responding in this way. Maybe we should cut back on screen time. No, don't do that, right? Like, you could see the internal draw to it because of what's happening to the reward center and the constant hit to that part of the brain. So, you know, I think not everyone, thank goodness, not everyone has a therapist for a parent, and there might be some other ways, but I again would seek out, if you feel like that there's for your specific family situation, if you're wanting to have that type of dialogue and don't know how, seek some professional help to go through specifically, how old is your kid? How mature is your kid? What have they been exposed to already? What are the family dynamics like? Because all of those things matter when it comes to what to say and when to say it. But I can't emphasize enough, talk early and talk often.
Thanks, Katie. How do you manage a young adult who blame shifts and never owns his part in a situation or isn't honest about what is happening?
Therapy, family therapy. Because as a parent, I'm assuming who asked the question as a parent, you will not be the one to show your loved one the light. And I think too, man, there's so much more probably to this story than we're able to get into, but I would encourage you to seek some family counseling. Go to a therapist who's skilled in family dynamics, and to create some peace and harmony within those family relationships, have a professional guide you. Bryan, would you say anything different?
I definitely. So a child is going to they could hear the exact same message from their parents and then hear it from a third party, like a professional, and it's going to connect in a much different way. And so that blame shifting that might be taking place in the family dynamic, we could have the same conversation, and you could call the therapist the mediator that says that message. They're going to hear it differently. It's going to register differently just because of the way the relationships work. And so I would venture to say that the blame shifting, and I don't have a ton of context here, but that individual likely knows that he is being or she is being deceitful and putting away blame. And I'd venture to say it's likely derived from fear of consequences, punishment, judgment. So that's why it's important to use the professionals and the resources that are out there to address some of this stuff, because it's hard. It's hard.
And do your own work. The healthier you are, the more that stuff doesn't land, right? When you're healthy and you're in a toxic relationship, things change as you get healthier. That things don't land from those toxic people in the same way. And do your own work. Get as healthy as you can possibly be.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We touched on this as well earlier, but I do love this question that came in. How can we build greater resiliency in our youth before these issues arise?
Bryan nailed it earlier with letting letting natural consequences and things, mistakes and failures and falls happen. Because so much of what we see at the later stages, right, like as things have progressed, is oftentimes a family who is rescued, who has gotten their kid out of a DUI, gotten their kid out of a charge of some sort related to drugs, gotten certain things off their record. They didn't get in trouble for certain things. The parents really protected them. And then you have a dynamic of real codependency and a real inability for, resiliency, the ability to bounce back from hard things. Well, if they never experience hard things, they never get to flex the muscle that is bouncing back from hard things. And so it's a series of starting to implement some natural consequences. I could give 100 different examples right now. I don't know with who asked the question. Everything from when your kid falls down, that you don't rush to catch him every single time, because he's never going to learn that when he runs around that corner, he should probably slow down. And the best way he's going to learn is when he slips and has a boo-boo, right? Because we can't protect our kids from everything. The same thing as they get older. If they're not doing well in school, don't make excuses. If they're not, if they're getting in trouble with the law, don't rescue. I have told many a parent, leave your kid in jail. Leave your kid in jail. They need to experience the natural consequence, because in jail, they're not going to die or hurt somebody else, likely, right? But when we rescue them and we rob them of the opportunity of experiencing life, and we rob them of the opportunity of building their own response to life, we create a dynamic that is so dangerous, and that is prevalent within a lot of addicted families, alcoholic families.
Thank you. So I just scrolled down.
Yeah,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bryan.
Sorry, Mark. I'll make it quick. I can speak, or I will speak personally on this one, and no fault to my parents here, because they've done a lot of great work. But I had reinforced in me that I was going to have a soft landing, whatever I did wrong. And so I was less fearful of consequences, because my parents' natural inclination, whenever they saw something go wrong with me, was to swoop in and fix it. And that didn't let me experience, which ultimately I did end up experiencing, some pretty drastic and severe consequences. But my parents had been doing their work and allowed that process to occur. But if they swooped in and fixed it, that reinforces for me, I can get away with it. So I'm going to keep doing it. So yeah, I want to put that out there.
Thanks, Bryan.
So I just scrolled down on the chat and saw a question that I had missed, and it's a good one. And there's a little bit of context. So my teen sits in his room all day. He has the perfect excuse. He's at Zoom school, but it's getting harder and harder to get him to come up for air. Before, he was doing some beer with friends and pot, but now we worry that he's just checking out. Should I hack in and check all his social media? Won't we lose trust?
Yes, you will lose trust. Even if you hack in and you find all the information, that if it's there, then what, right? If all the signs are pointing to it, and then you get verification that it's really real, you still have to understand and know what to do next. I think, again, honest conversation. And I don't know, did they say an age, Martha? No age?
They said teen.
Teen, okay, so high school, virtual, so high school. I think having the conversation around anxiety and depression is worth jumping into. And we see a lot of that in the evaluations that we do. A lot of parents are a similar situation, or just kind of I don't know what it is, and I need somebody to dig in. And when Bryan does the evaluation, he gets a ton of information that the parents would just never ever know. But so it could be a depression or an anxiety or something else that he's masking, medicating. And if that's the case, then you have a path to follow, so to speak. But I also think, some of the expectations with the household, the rules, and this is hard, y'all, this is hard, but it goes in line with what Bryan mentioned earlier about the 5 p.m. family time and the when you say you're going to do something, like you follow through with it. I call it forced family fun. There's got to be a more happy way of saying it, but we joke around in my family about forced family fun, and it's just something that is expected, that if family is going to decide to do something, everyone is a part of it. And it might be silly and it might be lame and it might be whatever, but it's intentionally setting time and space for some of those conversations to happen. Zoom school, virtual school ends, and there are breaks during that process. But it ends, right? 2:30, 3 o'clock is done. And so after that, then it's just an opportunity to connect. And Bryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I obviously have never met this individual or the family, but what immediately came to mind was there is likely some of this speaks to potential depression for me. It sounds like he's exhibiting some depressive symptoms, he or she. And so maybe a way that I would approach this is, you talked about forced family fun, Katie. I might even take it a step further and say forced behavioral activation. So whatever this individual is attached to, whether that be a video game or TV or whatever, say, hey, we are expecting you to be out of your room for an hour a day. If we're not recognizing that you're doing so, we're going to take your TV away for, a week. And so a good way to begin to treat depression is behavioral activation. And so I think that getting outside, just, taking your pet, if you have one, for a walk could be helpful. But something to motivate this person to get up and out is going to be important.
Oh, Bryan, I'm so happy you mentioned that. I know we're like right at the end of our time, but that was so brilliant in the talking about kind of digging into what is happening with, especially a kiddo, because that's who we're talking about, is kiddos. But to say like, oh, well, we're going to wait until the behavior gets better, and then we'll go and we'll do a family outing or whatever. The behavioral action that you implement is what brings you to the resolution, and not that quickly, right? Like, it's a process, but I can't wait until I feel like going and doing something healthy. I need to do something healthy, and then I feel like doing it more. And that is with depression especially. And Bryan specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is so powerful for our kids who are suffering from depression, anxiety, or anything else that's more mental health and substance. But that's a great point, and not meant to be punishment or punitive. And that if we can't do this, then we're going to have to take something away, but rather motivational, and also go on that walk with them, with the dog, join them in the physical activity, do whatever you need to do to make that connection and to do that behavioral change. I love that. Thank you, Bryan.
Well, we are right at 8:30. I just wanted to thank you, Katie and Bryan, for joining us tonight, and also all the attendees that spent their evening with us. Remember, we're here for you, even if you need to talk it out, have questions, need resources. We will be sending out an email to everyone that joined us with a recording of this presentation, along with all of our information. So feel free to reach out anytime, and thank you to everyone again.
Yeah, thank you, parents, for doing this tonight. An hour and a half well spent. And again, the only message you get tonight is talk often and early, have the hard conversations, and do your own work so that you're healthy to handle whatever comes your way, because something will come your way.
Yeah, thank you to everybody who joined. I hope that you're able to walk away with a little bit of hope, because if there's a situation where you're struggling, it can get better. I've seen it thousands of times. There is hope. I've experienced it personally, so there is promise out there.
Thanks, Bryan.
It does take hard work.
It's worth it. Worth it. Thanks,
Yes.
Martha and Caitlin. Thank you guys for your help. All the behind the scenes stuff. I appreciate y'all. And families, we're here. If you have questions, reach out. Happy to help.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.